Ziti TV. Today is one of my more favorite types of Ziti TVs. We have a special treat for everybody today. Let's see, where's my little PowerPoint that I like to bring on the screen? I put that up here. Show a little Ziggy. We got icons galore. We got a nice little Zero Trust Solutions icon in the TV. We got one right up here if you can see it there. And so we're going to be talking with Patrick from Zero Trust Solutions. And so why don't we just bring him on and say hi? And so here's Patrick.
Hey everybody,
Hey,
how's it going?
Patrick. I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Pretty damn good. Yeah, it's
Yeah, good
Friday
to hear.
afternoon here. I know
Friday
it's an afternoon
afternoon.
for you, but
So
it's actually just gone 5 p.m. So
5
as
p.m.
soon as
Sounds
this is
like
over,
somewhere
it's beer
in
time.
the UK, maybe somewhere in Central or
I'm in the Netherlands actually,
in the
so I'm one
Netherlands.
hour ahead of the UK and
Uh,
what, like 4 or 5 hours ahead of you?
yeah. About it's actually 6. It's 11 a.m. right here, right now. So that's cool. Again, this is Patrick, everybody from Zero Trust Solutions. Patrick, thanks for joining. Always enjoy talking to people who are using OpenZiti, who have played with OpenZiti, who trying the technology out. One of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to bring up your web page in case people were interested. Go check it out. Here is the cool little logo. I really do enjoy the little mesh. Any animations always a good idea, right? People love a
That's
nice animation.
MTLS. That all of the little
Oh,
notes that
oh, is
they're all
that what it
MTLS.
is?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. So MTLS, what is MTLS again?
Mutual TLS.
Mutual
Open
TLS, right?
for.
Yeah. So actually, fun question. Mutual TLS, is mutual TLS sufficient for a zero trust solution? Do you think mutual
Oh,
TLS
geez. Wow, I didn't know
is?
we were going straight
We're
into
gonna go right. We're gonna go right into it,
pop
right?
quiz.
Right.
Well, I mean, so at Zero Trust Solutions, we're a consultancy that does zero trust architecture work for clients. So it might be like building roadmaps, it might be evaluating vendors, it could be anything in between, right? So where we approach the problem from is what are first principles for zero trust? What are the tenets from this special publication 800-207? What does that imply? What do you need to build in terms of requirements, in terms of test cases from the back of that? So like
Now,
default denial, least privilege, dynamic access, continuous validation, all those good things.
what was that NIST article that you referenced?
Special publication 800-207 is
Eight
the
hundred two oh
seminal.
seven.
Yeah, that's like the seminal work on what is zero trust, what are zero trust architectures that NIST put out. I want to say in like 2018 now,
Gotcha.
maybe.
Yeah. Let's see. August 2020 date published. Yeah. Very
That's
neat.
version two, I think. There was a one before that, 2018. But
I was
yeah. So I was kind of loosely involved in this. I'm not mentioned as an author or anything, but I their first version was, let's say, not quite as glossy as that one. And me and another consultant, a guy called Richard Baker, who works with us as well, we went through it with a fine tooth comb and started poking fingers at different parts of the document. I think we sent back around 270 comments or something. Around a third of our comments made it through. So either from what we said, as well as probably what other people said was wrong with the first version, it got to that released version. So that's kind of like where my first chops came from in terms of zero trust. I was aware of it for like
now was
probably best part of 6 years, but that's the first time I'd seen it written clearly.
and was ZT
Um,
Solutions a company at that point? Like
no,
you
no,
said.
we're a little more immature than that. We're about 2 years in 2 years in the making so far.
Oh, nice.
So prior to that, I was building a zero trust consulting group within a large MSP. And in the end, it didn't go anywhere. So I thought, well, I mean, if MSPs are not really seeing that zero trust is the future, then I got to do this myself. So
Nice. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's
I
kind
mean,
of.
I personally, I think that the paradigm of zero trust really is the future. I've given a few presentations where I equate it to the before times, before there was TLS everywhere, using HTTP instead of HTTPS, FTP instead of SCP. I really do believe in some time, hopefully quickly, we will be moving everything that needs to be secure towards the zero trust paradigm. So that's a interesting little segue. What do you think it really even means to be zero trust? I started a little bit on this at the
Mm.
beginning with a mutual TLS. We were talking about MTLS and the cool little animation that you have there. So what does it really mean to be zero trust? What does that mean to you?
Well, so the way that we typically describe it for organizations we work with is that it's a culture change at first and foremost. The way that you're building your trust has to be the opposite way to the way you've been doing it so far. So the if you go back to like U.S. nuclear disarmament days in the 90s, with Reagan and Gorbachev, Reagan started using this term, this Russian proverb, which translated to trust but verify, as because they had nothing else, right? They had to trust that the Russians were disarming, and they would verify, but how do you really know if the verification is full, or whether there is a stash somewhere, and all of those kind of things. And this there may be a little bit of truth or a lot of truth in what I'm about to say, but my feeling is that that's kind of where security, today's enterprise security, has come from, right? It's come from this idea of trust but verify, which was then sort of instilled into the security apparatus in institutions, and we've just always done it that way. We've always had a castle and moat sort of thinking about security. We've put up a firewall, we build a wall, and it doesn't matter how high you build that wall, there might be one or two bricks that are cracked. You might have to push a few through so that you can have a
Right.
service that's available to the world. That was kind of like the way that we thought things had to be. And we never really stood back and thought about the principles behind it. And I think that's what zero trust actually really is, that culture of, okay, let's stop and let's think. Since we have breaches everywhere all the time, let's assume that that's our default stance. How do we build something that's resilient, that can still operate in that circumstance, right? Instead of building it for the best case scenario where there is no breach, there are no attackers, that unrealistic stance, let's take a more realistic stance and say, okay, how do we have something that continues to operate and can build trust, um, without actually getting totally taken down, right?
Sure.
So
Sure. So
so there's like that. There's the best I've heard it said um, is like, if you're trying to build a submarine, the submarine is can operate underwater, right, under these threats that are happening all around you, and
hmm.
it can actually move faster through, because of that, because you designed it that way. Whereas,
So
like, if it's top of that and assuming that it's not going to sink, then then
assuming that it's not going to
you are going to
sink.
sink at some point, right? Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah. So, talking about zero trust, what sorts of core pillars of zero trust do you find to be the most interesting or the most important? Like when it comes to zero trust itself, how do you go about making sure that you are able to operate in a hostile environment like that? Like,
Mhm.
what are some of those core pillars to you?
Well, so like the easiest way I've come to think of it is, how can we default deny everything, right? How can
Yep.
we just completely isolate ourselves and our assets, whatever that asset might be, whatever that service might be, right?
Yep.
So we often explore what is an asset to the business, to start with, because if you don't know what your assets are, then how do you protect it? How do you hide it and
hmm.
isolate it? And more than just hide, of course, because that's just like security theater then.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things that actually most interested me about the approach that Ziti has, and that's the fact that you can operate a sort of dark cloud network, right? You don't have to have any ports open. You don't have
Yeah.
to punch through that brick in the cement, to have your service available. Um, so that's super powerful, because I come in a long distant past in my career. I used to work in threat intelligence, and looking at open source intelligence, and looking at scanning type technologies and fingerprinting, And if you're an attacker that or simulating an attack, then those are the first things you're going to do. You're going to try and work out what assets does this business have that I can attack. How are they hosted? What ports are in use? What processes might be behind those ports? And then are there any vulnerabilities on those, right? And so if you can completely isolate those things away from the attacker, then how can they attack you?
Right. And so, is that what brought you to OpenZiti? Is that what first got you excited? Was this whole notion of a totally dark service, or was it something else? The open source nature of it, the community. What really turned you on about Ziti?
Well, you're not the only ones that can build dark cloud networks, for sure. I think it's worth saying that if I was to, I guess, characterize you very quickly against other vendors, I was thinking originally of you as the ZTNA vendor, right? That
Okay.
it is typically that user to service that people start thinking about ZT for. But then there's the IoT and the service to service and the lateral protection as well that can be provided. And so that kind of excited me as well. The fact that you don't necessarily say this endpoint is a client and that endpoint is a server. In fact, the way I understand it anyway is that the ZT kind of doesn't put that onus on the operator to choose. Is this a
No, in
client
fact,
or a server? Right?
that's a real good point, and it's funny because when you try to describe what and how people are going to be using OpenZiti, you inherently go to client and servers because that's just what people know. And so it's oftentimes easiest to refer to the client and refer to the server. But you're exactly right. In a point-to-point communication, who's the client and who's the server. And if there's bidirectional communication like you get with OpenZiti, well then it's truly peer to peer. And so another way to put it is peer to peer, or identity to identity, which is really what I try to say when I go out to the discourse posts. But um, like you said before, the leap to zero trust is definitely a bit of a leap, and you have to relearn some core ideas. And one of those ideas is that strong identity, being able to communicate to other strong identities. So yeah, I totally understand what you mean. The OpenZiti does not require you as the consumer to declare, if you are the hoster or if you are the contactor, the client, the server, however you want to look at it. But you can be both too. So a good example of
Mm-hmm.
both would be something like SSH. If you're trying to SSH from your computer to my computer, you can do that through your identity. And then if you give me the sufficient privileges, I can SSH from my computer to your computer. And those could all be through that same identity as long as it's authorized correctly. So yeah, that's really neat. Oh,
Yeah, and I think you're kind of touching on another point that got me interested as well, which is that you've kind of invented a, a sort of a community around what you're doing. So the verb to zetify is appearing quite often in conversations, and I see we've got actually a comment in the chat about what does it mean to implement a zero trust architecture? What do you really need? And what I quite like about what you guys are doing is that you're baking in all of the bits you need into common utilities that are in use already, right? So kubectl for accessing your Kubernetes cluster. You've got a zetified version of kubectl.
yep.
And SSH, you just mentioned SSH, right? You have ZSH, I believe,
Yep.
or ZSSH. I don't know
ZSSH.
what you're
Yeah.
calling it, but
Yep. In fact, I was just gonna touch on that because for OpenZiti, the thing that I think really differentiates that I've seen, I don't know if I've seen too many other technologies that do it, but actually embedding zero trust into your application through the use of SDKs is, in my opinion, it is the game changer. To get there, though,
mm-hmm.
we need to be able to support everybody from a ZTNA. So when I give presentations about this, I talk about network access, host access, and application access, the three kind of tiers of zero trust to me. or network access. You trust your local network, like you were saying before. You're in the behind the castle walls. You're over the moat, or whatever you want to, however you want to term it. Host access, meaning you've shrunken the moat and the castle very small. Now it's just your local machine, which is great. Like that's amazing. And then application access that takes that whole paradigm even further down to just the applications on your particular machine itself. And that's incredibly interesting and powerful. I was going to ask you, does ZT Solutions provide any application embedded solutions, or do you leverage those? Are you looking to leverage those?
So we're first and foremost a consultancy. So our services are people driven about our experiences or about how you build these architectures. So we don't typically provide services. In fact, we actually actively try not to. um, we I mean, I mentioned I come from an MSP background. I've been on the support calls when there's an attack underway, and I never want to be on that call again. It's just
I bet.
the scapegoat call is not the good one. And we try to actually not provide services, which is like one of the things that I've always really liked is that there's the whole Silicon Valley kind of I think it was more Google than anybody else of don't be evil, that sort of ideology
Yep.
of do good. And I heard, I think, the Brave browser CTO say a slightly different version of that, which I really like, which is don't put yourself in a position where you can do evil. And so I've took away from that don't host a service unless you really need to,
Sure.
because as soon as you take on that responsibility, you can build security as good as possible. But if we're assuming breach, at some point there will be a breach, and whether that's around you or within your application. And so if you can avoid hosting a service, in my opinion, I always try not to.
Gotcha.
So our company is all about consulting first and foremost. We do also help in terms of contracting for projects. So if you've got a project where you want to implement Zero Trust, we have specialists, architects, project managers, engineers that can help you with that. But we don't typically run the services at the end.
Gotcha. So actually, if we can go back to this question, because I didn't see the second part of the question where he asks, the Real Truth asks, what experience do you need to implement a zero trust architecture? Can you comment on that a little bit? What do you think of that?
Well, so for the utilities we talked about earlier, I mean, if you can download, if you can download the ZSH binary, if you can download a JWT token, you're good to go, right?
That's part of it. So there is the managing the policies, I would say, is something that one does need to learn, but that's not that's really not that much different than any what's the term for identity?
So I think consultants have a bad rep in terms of zero trust in a way, because there's a lot of marketing out there that is kind of making people wonder what zero trust really is and whether it actually has value, whether it's just a marketing term that vendors are sticking in front of their existing firewall or perimeter-based products or SSE products. And to that, I'd say yes, you have a point, but it doesn't actually have to be necessarily this sort of like 5-year approach. Like for a large enterprise, it typically probably will be like 5 years. Yeah, exactly that, right?
Right?
But
yeah.
but it doesn't mean you can't take small steps, right?
Uh-oh. Hang on, Patrick. I don't know if my audio has gone bad or my bandwidth. You seem to be frozen now. Let me let me put Patrick in the background and bring him back on. See if that helps. I don't think so. I've got a bad connection now. Oh, there he is. All right.
Sorry about that.
Are you back? Hey, we got it. We're back. The internet. All right, cool. Sorry. No, you're back. I can hear you. I can see you again. Everything seems good.
Cool. So yeah, I was basically talking about how don't eat the elephant whole, right? So if you're in a position where you can decide how to build your app architecture and it's a greenfield site, then why not use some of the SDKs from OpenZiti to save you some work and get the bonus points of a zero trust architecture in the same time, right? So if you take the SDK from OpenZiti, bake it in, then you get some of the policy authorization stuff by default. You get the MTLS by default, strong authentication by default, and the only extra thing you need to do is just wire it up to whatever you're trying to build. So
Yep.
so there's that side, and then the other side of the coin is, okay, what does the user need to do in that situation? Well, that depends what you're trying to build, right? Typically, the easiest way is install the agent, and you're good to go. But I mean, I think you've talked about it on a previous Ziti TV episode, the browser integration, right? Where you've got the agent baked into, I think it's WASM code that's running in a tab or something. Maybe you can explain it better to the audience.
Actually, browser's really interesting.
That's a game changer, right?
It's
Absolute
really
game
neat.
changer not to need to install an agent, because that's the other thing. You could also have that same GIF with, or GIF. There's a whole other debate.
I'm a GIF guy. I'm a GIF guy.
You're a GIF guy. Well, you could have that same GIF with sort of eye rolling on, I got to install an agent.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And one of the banes of everybody's existence is how do we combine all these agents together? How do I have not yet another agent? And so I haven't seen any other company that's able to have a ZTNA type solution without an agent. So
yeah,
that to me was super cool.
It's really interesting technology, and thanks for. I'm going to just take a real quick detour. Then here's the agent that I have installed. I use Windows. This is my ZD Desktop Edge browser. Actually, is capable of bootstrapping zero trust in your browser itself without the need of installing that particular agent. And that's really the important and interesting thing that we're talking about here with respect to browser. So I have a chat app called Mattermost, which is hosted by our hosting team. And when I go to app.mattermost.browser.cloudzd.io, I'm able to actually access the app, assuming it's running. Doesn't want to run in this. Oh, there it goes. Running this browser. I don't know why it wasn't running before. And now I'm actually accessing that server without the need to install an application. And so this here it's bootstrapped zero trust connection in my browser. It doesn't actually deliver the full functionality via WASM, but WASM is used, and Kurt maybe will keep me honest. It uses WASM for the TLS and cryptography, so that it's a bit faster than trying to do it in just JavaScript. There is a JavaScript SDK that comes down, and that's actually what's talking to the edge routers over that zero trust connection. But yeah, it's a suite of technologies and does some interesting stuff.
But I mean, that's a game changer in terms of use cases for large enterprises, because one of my clients at the moment is talking about, they have millions of customers. They have a CIM type platform. So they have already strong authentication for customers, but obviously they don't control the devices that the customers are using, and they cannot say to the customers, please install this agent, because it's way too much user friction, right? I'd say you could do that for employees, potentially for BYOD use cases. You can definitely do it if you own the endpoint that they're using. You can do it for your own mobile app by baking it into that, and then that's running on their device. But what about if it's a customer that's just going to your website and wants to log in, right? You don't want to have too many hoops for them to jump through, but you still want to have potentially contextual controls. You still want to have some dynamic access going on. So how do you do that? And the answer I had up until I saw ZT with this WASM technology was, you can't, right?
Right.
You can do some fingerprinting, but that's about it.
Now,
and so
did
it's
you
not
poke
real zero trust, right?
Did you poke at it at all? We've had somebody else who has tried to poke at browser and figure out what it did. And I remember they were watching one Ziti TV and they were quite happy that they weren't able to actually, it actually wasn't smoke and mirrors, right? It actually was legitimate. I don't know. Is that sort of the sort of thing that you do for your customers? You tell them, hey, I've already, I've poked at it and I've prodded it and it passes my sniff test.
Yeah, so we're set up in with three lines of business: know, empower, and solve. Know is the consulting side, and that's always first and foremost the majority of what we do. The
Mm,
empower was the contracting side, and then the solve side is where we actually build relationships with vendors that have solutions in the zero trust space, where we actually run them up in our lab, accredit them almost. We don't have an
ah,
exact certification.
right,
Maybe in the
right.
future we will, but we essentially test them for, are you actually doing the things you say you're doing? So if you say
Nice.
you've got zero trust in your name, are you doing least privilege? Are you doing dynamic access? Are you doing default deny? And are you doing everything granularly, right? So we have I think at the last count like 170 different requirements that we have for
Wow.
vendors, and we do an internal
Kind of
assessment. We don't publish
like a little report
those.
card kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. We don't publish those typically, but we do those ahead of actually partnering with vendors for the solve side of our business. So
Hmm.
we never recommend a solution to a customer or a client of ours if it doesn't pass the muster in terms of zero trust principles. So
That's really cool. Oh, so speaking of which, what does that journey look like for your customers with OpenZiti? Have you been deploying OpenZiti? Are people adopting it?
yeah, so we're still in early days. I would say we actually have we've only recently developed a relationship. So we actually have a launch coming up. So the people on this call are technically on the pre-launch,
Nice.
but we've already been socializing ZT with some of our biggest customers actually. And a really cool use case that we've been looking at is um, we've been working for about 2.5 years now on microsegmenting a huge hotel group, not the one that's in the news at the moment. And 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 we've been looking at how do we go further, right? How do we actually get down? Like the challenge that the CISO set us was, how do you zero trust down to layer two, right,
Mm,
of the OSI stack?
mm,
And how can you take a whole property and look at everything that's there in terms of asset types, and look at connectivity between those assets, either laterally or north south. And interestingly, the whole idea about north south disappears when you think about zero trust, because it only has a definition when you have a perimeter. If you
ah,
don't have a
right.
perimeter, then north south
Everything's
falls
north and
away,
south.
right?
That's right.
And
Yeah, I see that.
that's what makes it really interesting. That's why I was interested actually in the client server disappearing to peer as well. But going back to the point though, like so this really cool use case that we got to is DNS, right? We can't
Hmm.
microsegment DNS very well because so many things provide it, and so many things rely on it. So I threw this challenge at some of the folks at NetFoundry. Actually, can we do default deny for DNS, and how do we do that?
Hmm.
And it all comes back to a DNS volumetric attack that this customer experienced, and so they were looking at DDoS solutions to solve this problem. And what I'm really keen on doing is actually looking at, how do we solve this a different way? How do we completely isolate DNS
Sure.
from anybody who's not strongly authenticated? And so that completely removes the need to deploy a volumetric DDoS solution,
Right.
because you can't DDoS something you can't see.
That's right.
right?
So, and I'm interested. Did you choose to run your own DNS server and tunnel your own DNS then, or did you choose to leverage the OpenZiti
Well,
tunnelers and private DNS?
yeah. So I mean, we're talking about a huge hotel group here. So they already have their own internal DNS stack,
Yep.
with various different like a complete hierarchy of relays and things.
Yep.
So the approach that well, this is still mid implementation, by the way. So it doesn't. I don't even know if we're actually
Yeah.
going to fully implement this or not. But it's
Sure.
just a really cool use case that I want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make other people aware of. Because
Yeah.
if there's
Exactly.
other people in the same situation, then it might be a cool way to start doing zero trust to the real truths point in the chat there. Um, so like what 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 we were looking at is, okay, so if we're gonna default deny DNS, what is that gonna break, right? Because there's
Everything.
if you need to strongly authenticate stuff, then okay, let's look at endpoints, right? We can put agents on endpoints, so we can solve that problem where there's a real user behind it. But what about service identities? What about IoT, legacy IoT appliances that we can't put agents on? We could sit a lightweight connector right near it so that the perimeter becomes where the connector exists.
Yep.
Um, that's one approach. But then we started looking at it from a risk perspective, and so again, assume breach is really a kind of a different way to look at risk. And we started thinking, well, if we actually solve the problem for the majority of the business, where we can put agents, is it still as important if
Right.
we have a DDoS attack on the remainder, right? So if the things that are IoT controlled that can't be strongly authenticated via JWT tokens, via agents, if we're in that situation, we could actually lose that availability and it wouldn't be critical to the business. So Zitify the things that are critical, and then on a separate DNS relay, and then have like a non-Zitified DNS relay. That,
Yeah.
so
That's really.
that's the sort of blueprint that we're looking at the moment.
Yeah, that's cool. We've had other larger enterprises who have their own DNS set up, want to tunnel DNS, so it's totally not a first thing that we've heard. It's a common type of thing that people want to be able to do. So yeah, that's really neat.
Mhm.
That's cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean the other reason that I really like that is because during this microsegmentation project we're doing, we're checking ourselves, right? Because if you put something into enforcement in microsegmentation, you're tightening what can access your application laterally, right? And so we decided to sense check that by having a scanner, a network scanner, that then goes into different parts of the network and says, can I still see the stuff that
Oh
you're
yeah.
saying is segmented? And and through that we discovered, yeah, you can still see stuff because you can DNS everything.
Yeah.
You can see everything through DNS. You know it's there, because it's still in DNS. Okay, you might not be able to ping it,
Right.
but
You can
it's there.
you
So
can
like then
observe.
the problem becomes DNS, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like that joke goes, it can't be DNS. It was DNS, right? And it's
Yeah,
always DNS for sure. Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
Well, that's really cool. Now, what about? I think earlier in the call you were talking about like threat reductions, and is there anything additional that OpenZiti helped you with that you
Mhm.
specifically liked OpenZiti for? We talked about
Yeah.
the no ports, which is interesting. We talked about application embedded zero trust,
Mhm.
maybe private DNS. Anything else around threat
Well, we also
reduction that?
talked about the utilities as well, right?
Yep.
The Z-defined SSH and Z-defined kubectl. That there's one other point to that I think is really cool, which is there's a lot of talk of, so often when you have an admin use case, the solution that in the past has been build a Bastion host that you can do remote desktop
Yeah.
to get to, and then from there, that's the only thing that can access SSH, right?
Yep.
What Zetified SSH actually gives you the ability to do is get rid of your Bastion host entirely. Because if you can strongly authenticate with contextual access, then maybe that gives you enough reduction in well, increase in assurance to accept the risk of allowing somebody to go straight to whatever they're trying to access. So that not only is good from a security perspective, but it's also great from a usability perspective. So
Yeah.
no need to have a Bastion host. And there's a lot of talk about like Windows 365 in terms of ephemeral jump boxes. But
Hmm.
like, why even bother doing that now if you can have an isolation overlay network that can connect you direct, but still have the strong assurance levels and keep the risk low?
Yeah, that's
So
interesting.
so
I've not
that's like
heard
the
of.
extension to the Zitifying the utilities that I think is awesome.
Yeah, I've not heard of the whole idea of rotating bastions. Like that's. I mean, I guess that's an approach, but I've just never seen that done before. That's interesting. Cool.
Well,
Well,
well, I mean, so that comes out of live off the land, right? Live off the land became super popular for attackers, um, and often
I actually
somebody will install something on a jump box that might, I don't know, like let's give worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario, you install a compiler on your jump box, so that you can compile some weird tool that you need to develop something, right?
Hmm.
And then you forget about it and you don't remove it again. And it sits there, and the jump box was dedicated to one team 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 2 years ago. And it starts to suddenly be used by a different team. And it just grows and grows what's installed there. And so if an attacker happens to get in there somehow, they've then got the keys to the kingdom, or at least all the
Yeah.
ingredients sat there ready to go. So all of the like lol bins, all of, you can just bring your own source code and compile it if
Right.
we're talking about that worst case scenario, right?
Right. Right.
So then that undermines potentially all of the other security stuff that you've set up on the perimeter. Um, so 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 yeah, so that's why I moved from Bastion hosts to ephemeral Bastion hosts that are built from a known clean gold build,
Yep.
and only when you need them. So I mean, this is almost getting into a zero trust architecture as well. Like, don't have something running that you don't need to be running. Don't have a port open that you don't need to be open. It's like just. I mean, the way I think about it is zero trust is just in time manufacturing, right? It's that same change that happened with just in time manufacturing. Instead of having stockpiling all of your goods in a warehouse ready to go off if nobody wants them, you've got just in time access being provisioned at the time of need, and
Yep.
then once it's not needed, it's gone,
Right.
and then you don't have anything for an attacker to abuse. So
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. That's some really neat stuff. Well, we're at 37 minutes. I don't want to take too much of your time. Let's see. I know that I think we have something interesting coming up, though, right? You and Philip are going to get together. Is that right?
yeah, to ZT, or should you ZT, or how do you ZT?
Yeah.
So I used to pronounce zero trust as ZT, and then
Well, I can
then
understand
you
why.
guys came along, and now I'm not sure what I should say. But to zero trust, should you ZT? To ZT, should you ZT?
And so you
Is
and
the
Philip are
goal
going
of
to have a
our chat.
conversation here. Like I like the little fireside chat motif. That's kind of a neat idea. I like it. I'm going to put a. In fact, I think there might already be a link to the fireside chat in the description of this video down here, I guess. So if anybody wants to hear hear Patrick and Philip talk a little bit more about ZT, to ZT or not to ZT, that'd be really cool. Any
Mhm.
final thoughts that you want to get on the table, Patrick? It's been a nice chat so far.
No, nothing really. I mean, I've been really interested in ZT because, like, mostly, I mean, we talked about all the different little features and things that are like within your ecosystem, but the approach you're taking, the strategy of open sourcing your code, is super important for the whole cybersecurity industry, for every enterprise, because if you can't have a level, if you can't build trust in your source code and your approaches, then it's hard to use that in your security architecture where you're default denying and building trust, right?
That's a
The
fun way to
the
think about it. I've never actually thought about the that whole aspect. I mean, it's obvious. You know, we say, "Hey, the source code's out there. People can go and scan it." But I never personally thought of it as a zero trust kind of aspect. But that's, you're right. I think that is important piece of the puzzle. Sorry to cut you off there, but yeah, totally.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, you just made me think of one other thing. Maybe I don't know if the screen share is still
Yeah,
up,
I can bring it right back
but
up.
let me put up this paper site. And if you haven't seen it before, then go check it out. It's an awesome paper. It's a quick read. So this is from Ken Thompson back in I want to say it was 1984. That awesome year. And so this white paper was his acceptance speech for his Turing Award, and he basically wrote a binary that compiles itself in the smallest amount of code possible. So a cool coding challenge. And then he decided to see what else he could do with the same sorts of approach of self-compiling code that compiles itself. And he adapted the Linux operating system so that he was able to take the Linux source code, and at the time, actually, sorry, no, he managed to Trojan the C compiler itself, so that when you compile anything, if a certain string was in the source code, he would adapt it, right? And so
Sounds like
he
Log4Shell.
right, exactly, right. So it's like sort of polymorphic code type at compile time. And so he did this on the C compiler, and he removed any bugs he previously had in there, and was able to at compile time insert bugs back into the source code that were not there. So if you inspected the source code, there was no bugs, or at the time, right? There was no bugs before all of the Linux bugs that have come since. But he just demonstrated that he could put whatever username password he wanted and embed it into the source code at compile time, so that he could log into any Linux machine that had been built off the back of that
Oh wow.
that Trojan operating system that was compiled. And so his like moral of the story was, you can't trust code that you did not totally create yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say it's super important what you're doing with Ziti in terms of open source first. I really like that approach, and I wish you the best of luck with it.
Great. Well, Patrick, it's been wonderful talking to you. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out. ztsolutions.io if you want to check them out. And come see Philip and Patrick talk on the fireside chat. All right,
Thanks very
Patrick.
much.
Yeah.
Great talking to you.
Cheers.